I decided that instead of coming up with an itinerary, that I would ask random Icelandic strangers about their happiest memories and then go find those places where their happiest memories took place.
Hello and welcome to One-Off Travel Stories. I'm your host, Andrew Tawaschurna. Here each episode I chat with someone about one of their favorite travel stories. That one story that they've told countless times to friends and family around the dinner table. Today we're joined by Anne-Marie Wells. Anne-Marie is an award-winning poet, playwright, memoirist, and oral storyteller. She's produced a lot of amazing work. She went viral on TikTok and landed her book in the top 10 Amazon poetry collections. She's the founder of The Joy of Poeting, which is a weekly live show. Her children's book, Mommy, Why Am I a Bird, was featured on Wyoming's PBS Storytime. And she's currently got a work in progress, which is called Happy Iceland, a travel memoir. In fact, she's going to tell us about her time in Iceland today, and her approach to her trip is incredible. I found this story just so interesting, how she went from person to person and let her conversations dictate her travel experience, and specifically about their happiest memories, which is such a cool idea. So I'll let her tell more. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Anne-Marie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Thank you for joining. I like to ask, as I typically open these up, where are you calling in from?
I'm currently in Northern Virginia in the outskirts of DC.
Awesome. And is that home for you, or are you on the road?
This is home. Yeah, this is home. My partner and I moved here just short of 2 years ago. We were living in Wyoming before now. Yeah.
Nice. Beautiful, beautiful places. That's lovely. I know a little bit about you from your website, and obviously a little bit that you've told me, but I know you're a writer, correct?
That's right. Mostly a poet, but also dabble in other genres as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And I guess, tying in travel, because we're gonna get to one of your travel experiences. How do these things sort of tie together for you? I know you've told me you haven't done a big adventure in a while as far as travel goes, but a lot of the people I write with I write with a lot of the people I speak to and interview on podcasts. Travel has been like a big influence on their writing, whether that's poetry or novels or whatever they happen to be writing. Has that been the case with you?
Well, it's complicated. So, in the past, when I was younger and single and not tethered and did a lot more traveling than I do now, I blogged, and that was my way of staying connected with my friends and family when I was on the Florida National Scenic Trail and I didn't have internet most of the time. And this was pre smartphone era, so there wasn't any live update possibility. I would write meticulous notes in a notebook, and then when I would have internet at a library or maybe a stranger's home or something like that, I would write blog posts to keep people updated on where I was, what I've been doing. And I went to grad school in Europe. I did the same thing. And it's more of a way to spread that information widely so I don't have to explain to every single friend and every single family member the same exact stories, that if they want to stay updated, then they can through my blog. I didn't realize how big writing was in my life. I always wanted to write. I always felt this urge to tell my story to the masses, but I never took that as a sign that that's what I should be doing in my life. And it
Right.
actually wasn't until my big adventure in Iceland that I said, "Oh no, I have to write a book about this now." And that really prompted me to take writing more seriously. I started reading books, taking classes. I went back to school. I got a degree in English. I took every workshop I possibly could, started going to conferences, and steadily saw more and more success as I improved, and led me to the career that I have now.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting, the blogging part. I've blogged little bits and pieces from traveling before, usually when I was traveling with more of a purpose, I would say, like volunteering for interest, for instance. But really cool that that sort of led you into writing more. Curious now, how did you end up, and maybe you've been doing it forever, but specifically on poetry?
That is also a complicated story. So, I, let's see, 5 years ago, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and
Hmm.
as I was going through that journey, more of a metaphorical journey than a physical one, I also was blogging. People wanted to know how my dad was, how I was. I was living in Wyoming at the time. I had uprooted my life to Florida where my parents were in order to care for my dad at the end of his life. And prior to this time, I did not write poetry. I didn't attend workshops. I didn't really read poetry unless it was assigned to me for, college reading or something.
Right.
It wasn't my genre. But I was in the hospital with my dad. Um, he he was rushed to the hospital. He had sepsis and pneumonia on top of his cancer. We didn't know, and he just collapsed. And while I was sitting next to his bed on this little, vinyl couch in the hospital, I was compelled to write a poem. And I borrowed a pen from the nurse's station, and I took a receipt out of my bag that I had, and I wrote a poem about going to the beach with my dad one time when we saw sea turtles emerging out of the sand and flopping their way to the ocean, these baby turtles. And I wrote a poem about it. And I really don't have an explanation as to why I was compelled to write a poem, but then I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop writing poems. I just started writing poem after poem, and my dad lived a little short of 2 months after that. And within that time, 5 of my poems were accepted for publication, and which is like a lot. And I was just so proud to be able to tell him that, like,
Yeah.
I wrote some poems about this, and they are going to be published. And then now I have dozens of poems published, 2 poetry collections. I teach poetry, and have a poetry show, The Joy of Poeting. Poetry kind of took over my life after that. It didn't really have anything to do with physical travel or cultural exchange, but I was more of a playwright and more of a memoirist in my blogging. And then poetry has kind of taken over my life now as a writer.
Well, that's a very beautiful story. A great way to sort of get into poetry to sort of, I imagine you had a lot on your mind.
It was
And
definitely a catharsis, and
yeah,
now I get to help others in the same way. I provide poetry workshops, and I do one called Synonyms for Grief, and that's a way that other people who have experienced, any kind of grief or loss, that they, even if they're not writers or also have never written poetry before, that it can be used as a vessel in that way.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And your like topically speaking, um, your poetry, does it range? Does it still focus on sort of experiences in your life? How is it
Yeah,
varied?
I'm definitely a memoirist. Like, I love to
Yeah.
talk about myself, and my poetry is no different. My first collection of poetry is a memoir in verse,
Hmm.
and I use the foundations of my blog posts actually to create that memoir, but framed through poetry. And most of my poems are um, just moments in time in my life, and taking a snapshot of that moment and turning it into a poem for the most part.
That's lovely. And I guess it sounds like you've been blogging for a long time. Did you journal before that? Is your blog sort of like a journal?
Yeah. I when I was in high school, I had a live journal. I don't know if you were alive in the time of live journal, but it was like the precursor to Blogspot or I don't know, the way that people, like, everybody has a website now. Before, nobody had a website.
Yeah.
They had AOL Instant Messenger, away messages, and then they have it a live journal. And so I would write about my life through high school and college in my live journal, and then switch to Blogger when I was in grad school because that was like the hip thing then.
Yep.
And then when I was traveling through Iceland, it was mostly just Facebook. So I had my Facebook posts, but they were novels long of everywhere I had been and all the people that I had met and the places I was going and seeing and all the things I was doing.
Right. No, that all tracks. Yeah. Um, and a good segue though, because I know you're going to tell us the story of travels in Iceland, or a story from your travels in Iceland.
Yeah.
You're working. So, is this correct? You're currently working on your travel memoir about your Iceland trip. Is that correct?
Well, it's written. It's
Okay.
written. So I was seeking representation for it and shopping it out to publishers, but it's been a decade, and uh, and I'm getting impatient. And now that I know more about the literary industry and the publishing industry, I am taking matters into my own hands and I'm publishing it through my own publishing house, Star Belt Press. So it'll come out next June, in June 2026. That'll be the 10-year anniversary of my trip.
Cool. Well, yeah, I guess let's talk about Iceland. Why don't you sort of set the scene a little bit about the story you're going to tell, specifically around that trip?
Yeah, so I was 29 years old and living in Minneapolis at the time. As you can tell, I've lived in a lot of places.
Yeah.
I move around a lot, a little bit of a vagabond. I was living in Minneapolis on the cusp of my 30th birthday and just really depressed. I was seeing my friends who were my age having successful careers. They had steady and stable lives. They were traveling for fun, going on vacations that they could afford, and and they were meeting the loves of their lives as well. And I was jumping from one failed relationship to the next, and one failed job to the next, and my life could be described as anything other than stable. And I was just kind of like, what am I doing wrong? What am I not getting here? And it's not that I didn't want those things. I did. It wasn't for lack of trying. I just, just was miserable with everything that I was
Mm.
doing. But I had this dream of going to Iceland, and I impulsively decided, I'm going to go for my 30th birthday. I'm turning 30, and now is the time. But I'm also, because I'm kind of impulsive, I'm not much of a planner.
Hmm.
So I'm not the type of person who says, okay, I'm going to go here and here and here, and here's everywhere that I'm going to stay, and I'm going to rent a car from here, and everything is all planned out. I'm more of an improvisational person. And um, so I came up with this cockamamie idea about to fall asleep one night when this, I tell people that a ghost told me to do this because I really have no explanation as to how I got this idea. But I decided that instead of coming up with an itinerary, that I would ask random Icelandic strangers about their happiest memories and then go find those places where their happiest memories took place. And I was a little bit nervous, but then once I got my flow, then I felt more confident. And the first person that I found was an airline worker, so outside of the airport. And I asked him about his happiest memories in Iceland, and he said that he was really happy camping with his friends and family in a place called Vestmannaeyjar, and that now as an adult he goes there with his buddies and they play drinking games and blah 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 now that they're older.
Right.
So I had a little notebook. I wrote down, Vestmannaeyjar as best as I could, not knowing how that was spelled. And then I used my map, and I had like a primitive iPhone, but this, you know, times are different even 10 years later. So I had a physical map, and I found Vestmannaeyjar on my map, and it was an island off the coast, and you had to take a ferry to get there. So I set off hitchhiking down the road with my
So wait,
thumb out.
so wait, uh, just as a quick question. So,
Yeah.
had you started asking people before you actually went to Iceland, or
No, no,
you,
it was right when I got there. Yeah.
okay, so you'd arrived and then you decided, okay, you're going to take your sort of chance encounters with strangers
Hmm.
and see where those guide you, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
yeah.
and um, you know, going on your thing, actually, a couple of things. One, almost everyone I've spoken to can't necessarily afford vacation in the kind of American sense of a vacation, right? So, which is really interesting because these are some of the most intrepid travelers that you could speak to. So, very common, seeing people's like Insta stories or TikToks or whatever, and being like, "Well, what am I got going on?" And then figuring out how to travel for cheap. So, I've heard so many of those stories. So, anyway, this is more for people listening. You definitely don't need much. You can get out and do it. Um,
But this,
yes.
I have to say, it wasn't my first rodeo hitchhiking or stealth camping the way that I was. So I didn't bring a tent with me. I only had a tarp that I would roll myself up in. I had a sleeping bag, but I would roll myself up in a tarp and kind of hide in the woods or in a ditch somewhere.
um,
And yeah.
this leads to my next question. Actually, perfectly was
Okay.
what were you thinking around prep? It sounded like you don't do a lot of planning, but to your point, you
I
maybe
did
you'd
prep
done
a
some
little bit.
camping before. Yeah.
Yes, so I'm an outdoorsy person and had done backpacking trips and learned a lot of things along the way. I had mentioned that I backpacked along the Florida National Scenic Trail. I learned a lot there, learn as you go type of thing, and learned how to make a stove out of a Coca Cola can. So that way you don't need like a big camp stove and you have to like, pump the fuel into it, and it's like bulky. You have to have like fuel canisters. This I would get antifreeze from the gas station and then
Yeah.
set that on fire in the Coca-Cola can, and it was just enough to be able to boil a pot of water so I could make rice, instant oatmeal, ramen, and coffee. And that's pretty much what I lived off of, other than tortillas and jelly out of a tube that that I would put on my tortillas. So
Right.
primitive living, other than when strangers would see me and treat me like a feral cat that they wanted to like tame and bring into their home and let me take a shower, give me a hot meal or something like that, and a nice bed to sleep in to boot. So, but when I wasn't being adopted by strangers, I slept under my tarp and and made instant oatmeal and ramen and that kind of thing in my Coca-Cola can stove.
Okay. So, you're 29, you're heading to Iceland, and you fully prepared to just, stealth camp, as you said, and kind of figure it out as you go.
That's
And
right.
where you landed was, I don't know where I'm gonna go, but I'm gonna talk to strangers about their happiest moments, and then visit those places.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay,
I
super
know
cool.
that it sounds cockamamie, but I have had other cockamamie ideas and they have worked out just as well. So, uh,
uh, Honestly, I love the happiest memories idea. That's so cool. The stealth camping, being on the road, yeah, like that make me a little nervous. But again, I've talked to lots of backpackers who are doing this in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere with minimal stuff. So you got to do what you got to do, right?
yeah, and I also didn't have a lot of money. So I spent most of my savings on the plane ticket itself. So I was
Yeah.
there for 5 weeks and I had about $500 for the whole 5 weeks. And I ended up not spending very much of it because I didn't eat out at restaurants. I only bought like basic amenities at grocery stores. I didn't stay in hotels. I didn't rent a car. So mostly my expenses were groceries and a couple times when I stayed in the backyard of a hostel because they had a
Wow.
nice fence that I could pitch my tarp up against it and use it as a windbreaker. So, and they only charged me like 15 euros a night to sleep in their backyard.
Nice. Okay, so
Yeah.
I jumped in because I wanted to get a little bit more of this background because it's fascinating. But yes, you had just spoken to your first stranger who shared their happy memory, and I wrote it down, but I'm not going to try to say the name. But
Yeah, Vestmannaeyjar, yeah.
yeah,
So I did end up making it, through hitchhiking. I, was picked up by a couple of Norwegian brothers who were on their own kind of, impromptu vacation for a long weekend together, and they also didn't really have a plan. They had some ideas of, places that they wanted to visit, but then when they brought me to the ferry, they were like, "Oh, we're gonna come with you because this seems pretty cool." And
Hmm.
so, I went to Vestmannaeyjar. We ended up making friends on the ferry ride. We had like a cookout and camped out for the night. And the next day they left on the ferry, and I stayed there to find my next person to interview. And I ended up getting picked up by another random stranger, a woman whose happiest memories took place at her own home. And I said, could I see? And she was like, sure. And like immediately made a U-turn in the road to like take me to her house to show me where her happiest memories took place. And her happiest memories were when she was much younger. She had two young children with her husband, and she had an inexplicable illness that rendered her paralyzed. And
Okay.
she had to be airlifted to Reykjavik on the mainland to have rehabilitation, and she was there for 6 months. And she was just so grateful to her husband for taking on the role of caregiver. She was a full time mom, and
Yeah.
her husband had never cooked anything in his life, but was cooking for their two girls and getting them, cared for, however young that they were, while she was away. And she said that when she came home eventually, and she still wasn't well, she was homebound for a long time, that she had this moment where she was looking into the kitchen at her husband who was cooking dinner, and she just thought like, I am so lucky to have such a wonderful husband who didn't complain, who hasn't made me feel bad about not being able to help or perform my role, and who just took on all of these extra responsibilities and was glad to do it. And so she took me into her home to like show me where she stood looking into the kitchen at her husband at the stove.
Oh,
And yeah, I mean, really just really wonderful and open-hearted people. I also met After that, I met two young, like 12-year-old girls whose happiest memories were in their previous childhood neighborhood that they didn't live in anymore. And they would play a game akin to hide and seek together. And I went to go find their childhood neighborhood, the street where they grew up on together. I met a car mechanic whose happiest memories was playing basketball in high school with his friends, and I went to go find the basketball courts where he would play with his buddies. And I found the childhood farm of a rose garden caretaker. And I mean, all of these stories seem kind of basic. I found the swimming pool where a young dad said that he felt really happy that day watching his son dive into the pool for the first time.
yeah.
And so I went to go find that public pool where that happened. And all of these stories were more or less like that. It was a moment of connection with somebody else. And I want to say that the life stories of all these people changed me right away, and I found my dream job and the love of my life immediately. But I guess bad habits die hard, as they say, and so it took me a while for that to really um, click with me. But I feel like the biggest thing that I took away from all of these stories, and I collected 12 stories in total,
Hmm.
12 different happy places, that I needed to focus less on the bigger picture and zoom in on these little moments of delight. And every night, and I mean literally every night before going to sleep, my husband and I do what we call delights. And we just list the different things that delighted us that day. And usually they're pretty mundane. I was delighted to see a goldfinch at the bird feeder that we have in the back of our apartment. I was delighted that there were no crazy drivers on my commute home. I was delighted that um, my package came on time and whatever, those kinds of like mundane things. But then we also have these other moments of joy. We have a 1-year old and he's learning how to talk, and he's, learning how to be a human being, and watching him every single day. There's 10 to 20 delights a day with him learning how to say a word, or him discovering himself in the mirror. Right now, he's really into chasing his own shadow, and it is the cutest thing. He waves at his own shadow and then chases his shadow, like squealing so happy, like trying to chase his shadow, and it's just the best thing in the world.
That reminds
Uh,
me of Peter Pan.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
100%. I had that exact same thought too, like, Peter Pan and his shadow. So we go through this kind of catalog every day of these little moments of delight, and it really has changed my perspective. It has definitely kept me afloat, especially these days when there seems to be no good news, and every day it seems to be getting worse and worse. That just honing in on our own little corner, our own little nest here, and focusing on what good or what delighted us that day. Seeing a bunny, or there's this little nature trail by our house that we go to pretty regularly, and there was a vulture at the top of a dead tree with its wings out into the sun, and we were just remarking how that it looked like the vulture was like flashing somebody on the other side, and we were kind of joking about that. And um, yeah, we saw these beautiful flowers today. We went there this morning, and we were supposing what kind of flower they were. I thought maybe that they were a member of the carrot family because of the way the leaves looked, but I was wrong. But just delighted us to see these new flowers. We were just there like 2 days ago, and then these flowers appeared. They were brand new. So um, I think if I took anything away from all of these stories, it was that happiness doesn't have to come from these like big exciting things. Nobody said, "Oh, this time when I took this amazing trip,"
mhm.
like nobody said, "Oh, when I got this huge promotion at my job." I didn't go to anybody's work. 0%. Like not a single person said anything about their job. And even nobody said things like, "Oh, the day my son was born," or anything. It was really these really simple moments of delight. And even one time I was picked up by a couple. They were older, and I said, they were I would go to a place, and it was usually like the first person that I encountered afterward that was a local and not
Okay.
another tourist. I would ask,
Yeah.
and
Just to jump in before you, because I'm curious, what would you generally say to that person?
I would say, "Hey, my name is Anne Marie, and I am traveling in Iceland, and I'm collecting stories of happy memories. Can you tell me about a time that you felt really happy here in Iceland?"
And
Something like that.
would they be like, "Oh, okay," and jump into it, or would they be like, are
Mostly,
you writing? Are you writing an are you a journalist, like, or would they just be happy to engage?
mostly people were just happy to engage. And I think because I had a little notebook that I was writing, I was like, ready to write.
Yeah,
So it
yeah.
wasn't like they would start and be like, "Oh, wait, let me write this down." It was like I
Right.
was ready to take notes. And so I think maybe that also made them feel pressured to answer.
Okay.
Because it's like, imagine if somebody comes up to you and they're like ready to write your answer down, you feel like, I don't know, obligated to give them something. But mostly people were just really open, like, sure, yeah, here's a time when I felt really happy. And there was only one person. I think it was that young dad I just mentioned about with his kid, and I
Mm,
like went up to him, and there was no one around. We were in like an empty parking lot because the person who told me that he was happiest, it was on his first day of flight school. So I went to go find this flight school, which was like in an industrial area. There was no like residences. It was kind of desolate, and it was also nighttime. So the building was closed. There were no cars. So I'm like a stranger coming up to this guy, speaking to him in English, and then saying like, "Hey, could you tell me about your happiest memories?" He was kind of like looking around, like, "Am I on candid camera or something?" And
yeah.
he seemed kind of apprehensive. And then when I was writing it down, like, I think he felt worried that I was going to try to follow him or find him or something. And I said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to like find you at the pool or something." And he's like, "Oh, okay." But then like the next day I did go to the pool, and I was like, "Oh God, I hope he doesn't show up and I'm here." um, but yeah, that was the only time that I felt like somebody was apprehensive to talk to me about happiness.
Yeah.
And but I am also like, I was 29, I had my hair in pigtail braids. I didn't look uh threatening, I don't
Right.
think. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And I had a big backpack. I looked like a tourist. I think most of the time when I went up to somebody, they thought I needed help. And
Yeah.
so then they were like, "Oh, you need help?" And it's like, "No, I want to know about your soul. Like, tell me about the happiest you've ever felt in your life. I'm ready to take notes." Things.
um, of the 12, I guess, places that you visited, and asking from your perspective, not necessarily like the most fascinating story, but what was the most interesting for you to visit? And maybe that's because it was inherently interesting, or maybe it was just that particular day it struck you as being interesting.
That's really hard to say. They all had uh, their own kind of interest to them. But when you asked the question, the first one that popped into my mind was the cafe. So I was going to tell you about this couple that picked me up, and I
Yes.
asked them about their happiest memories. And the wife was like, "Oh, we just felt really happy last night eating at this nice cafe. Didn't you feel happy there?" And the husband said, "Oh, yes, I felt really happy there. Yes." So I wrote down the name of the cafe, and it wasn't too far away. It was in a place called Norderfjordur in the North Fjords. And as I was hitchhiking there, I was picked up by an Icelandic auto mechanic on
Okay.
his way to go fix a flat tire. I only knew this because he had the Swiss man whose flat tire he was going to fix in the car with him, because the
Hmm.
Icelandic auto repairman did not speak English. But I also speak French. So I was able to speak a French franglais, French English mixture with the Swiss man. And to try and get the Icelandic man to not feel so isolated, because we were in the car together for like 2 hours, no joke. And we were just talking to each other. I was trying to say every Icelandic word that I knew to him. And so we would be driving through the fjords, and I would say, like, "Water, blue, wow." And like, "Turn," like a type of bird, that like a seagull. And he'd be like, "Wow, like, you know that word." And I also met this gentleman before that who was really well known in the area, because he was like the main electrician for that whole region. And since this guy was an auto repairman, I was like, "He probably knows this guy." And I said, "Oh, do you know this guy?" And showed him the picture on my phone. He's like, "Oh, yeah, I know that guy." And so we were kind of connecting in that way. And when I got out of their car, when they got to the Swiss man's RV with his other friends, he gave me a chocolate milk out of his out of his trunk of his car, and like sent me on my way. So then, as I'm continuing to find this cafe, I get picked up by the next car. And there are no cars either way. It's a very isolated area. And I was walking maybe 20 minutes, and this car just stopped in the middle of the road. And I said, "Oh, hi, I'm on my way to Norderfjordur." And they're like, "Oh, we know who you are." And I was, what? And they just start getting out of the car and moving all of the stuff in their back seat to the trunk so that I could sit in the back of their car. So then I learned from them that as they were passing the broken down RV, the Swiss man jumped out into the road to stop them. So they stopped the car thinking he needed help. And he said, "Oh, we don't need help, but there's a really nice American girl who's hitchhiking. And if you can, you should pick her up." But then, the Swiss man was talking to this couple, the Icelandic auto repairman came out. And in Icelandic, he said, "Oh, there's a really nice American girl hitchhiking. And if you can, you should pick her up." So then they said, on recommendations like that, we had to pick you up. So they ended up bringing me to Norderfjordur. They were staying in a campground, and I was stealth camping. I found a nice place on the back of a boulder that had nice wind protection. um, but when I went to the cafe the next day, which happened to be my 30th birthday,
Mm.
I sat down for dinner, and at the end of the dinner, the cafe owners came out with cake and like a hot chocolate and said, "Happy birthday." And I was like, "What? What? Like, how is this possible?" And they're like, "Oh, a little bird told us." So later, the day after that, I went up, I found the couple at the campground. I said, "Are you the little bird who told the restaurant owners that it was my birthday?" And they were like, "No, we didn't tell them anything." So I was like totally flabbergasted. I ended up meeting up with that couple at the end of my trip before I left. And actually, the husband drove me to the airport before I left. But they had learned, because they stayed at the campground longer, that the campground manager overheard our conversation, and he was the one who told the restaurant owners it was my birthday.
Wow.
But that just leads me to think, like, why? This campground owner, he didn't know me, or manager, he didn't know me. I was a stranger. But he overheard this story and then decided to tell the restaurant owners, "Oh, it's this girl's birthday." And then they gave me free cake and hot chocolate. It's just like, these strangers who don't know me at all, why would they care? Why
Mm-hmm.
would they give a shit about me? I'm nobody. But they like went out of their way to do this nice thing for a stranger, and
Yeah.
that's the one that really stands out to me. It's just like this, domino effect of one crazy stranger than fiction situation after the other. And
It,
that's why I had to write a book about it. Like, you see why? Like, I couldn't just not.
um, that's a beautiful story in itself, and I don't know. You're right. Why would they? But it dawned on me that you're talking to everyone about happiness. You seem to be, kind as a person, taking notes and genuinely interested. So it's kind of just what it feels like, one of those things that sort of passes forward, right? Like it comes around, goes around
Maybe
situation.
so. Yeah, maybe
But
so.
it sounds like a very happy memory for your 30th birthday.
Yeah,
Speaking of
something
happy
I'll
memories.
never forget for sure.
Yeah, and to your point about writing a book, 100%. I mean, I was thinking about this. I went to Iceland last year.
Hmm.
I do this. One of the things I do when I'm traveling is I visit national libraries. So
Oh, nice.
I've been to many, I don't know, 12, 15 national libraries, something like that. But
I
I
love that.
went to the National Library in Reykjavik. And I mean, the first thing I thought was, Iceland would love to have your story. This is like genuine, just people around Iceland living their life, talking about their happiest memories. That's the kind of thing you find while you peruse national libraries into like the random sections of the library. So I've picked up a lot of books by local authors or whatever, and there's some cool stuff like that. So definitely came to mind. And I almost want to hear like you doing this, but just going further, right? Like, someone's not like, I could tell you my favorite memory, which I live in the US, but I'm from Canada. So I'd be like, if you want to go to Canada, head there. That feels like it would make quite an interesting story about people's happiest memories across cultures.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, 100%. And people ask me a lot, like, "Aren't you afraid of solo traveling as a young woman?" And, I guess a little bit, yes, but you have a little bit of fear everywhere you go, and in all of my experience, I have found that most people are genuinely good, and most people don't wanna harm you in some way. And they're also taking a risk. Like, sure, I look non-threatening, but that doesn't mean I am not a threat, like I could also try to be, scam them in some way or steal or do something malicious. But I think because we both on both sides there's a little aspect of trust that I think that spreads, and I think that people are interested in cross cultural exchange and um, I don't know, spreading goodness for the most part.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely was. I just want to hear all these stories. So you've got something there. Um,
I'll send you a
take
copy of my book when it comes out.
Please, or just let me know and I will pick one up. I've spoken to a number of writers and their stories have been really interesting. And I've spoken to a bunch of women now who solo travel. And apart from what you just said was that most people have been very kind. The other thing that I've heard many times is, you got to trust your instincts, and
Mhm.
if you're listening to yourself, you'll stay out of trouble as well. So
100%, yeah. And I think I also had the trust within myself to be able to get myself out of any situation. And so because, I in my life, I had, some scarier dangers and situations traveling through Europe as a grad student and on the Florida Trail and all of the different places that I've traveled in the US and, have been able to manage. And so I think because I have that trust within myself, I trust my gut when it tells me something.
yeah, I mean, if you can cook a whole dinner with antifreeze, a Coke can, some rice, then I think you've probably got some life experience you can lean back on. Um, how did you end out the trip? What was the end of the trip like and on your way home?
Yeah, so my very last happy place, a woman was with her friends when a volcano erupted. And she wrote down the names. I couldn't possibly say that name. It's really wild. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't think I was able to find where she actually was with her friends, but I was able to see the craters that this volcano left behind. And so I was on this trail, and it was extensive. So it in the um, notes that I found in a camp guide, it said that it takes the average person 8 to 12 hours to hike it. And I said, okay, I'm going to be one of those 12-hour people. And because I'm okay fit, but I'm not like, ultra marathon or, particularly fit person. So I went on this trail and uh, it wasn't the easiest in general, but I did make it in 11 hours. So I made it before the 12-hour
Nice.
mark. But because it was so strenuous and stressful for me, there was a lot of loose rocks, and I ended up sliding down a glissade and like right before a ravine, and it's scared the shit out of me, and I said, okay, this is the end. I still had another week of my trip, and I said, but I'm good, I don't need to find another 12, perfect number, then hours in the day. That's 12 is a really great number. And so I spent the last week of my trip reaching out to people who had helped me and who were particularly kind, and just meeting up with them again. So the couple that had picked me up and took me to Norderfjordur, I met up with them at their home outside of Reykjavik. I met up with another family similar, uh, just very kind and generous with me. And I went to visit them, and another gentleman who ended. I stayed at his house maybe 3 times. He became kind of like my Icelandic uncle, and and he was just so. And I met his family. For some reason there was like a town fair that day, and they had fireworks. So I was out with his grandchildren and his sons watching fireworks together, and that was like the last day that I was in Iceland. And then the next day I went and flew back to the United States and had to face the reality of life again, that I was unemployed and in a dead end relationship. And I was um, I had lived in Minneapolis before I went on the trip, but when I was coming back, I was living in Colorado. And so when I came back to Colorado, I broke up with my girlfriend at the time, and I moved back to Wyoming, where was more of a place that I felt like I belonged, and met my now husband. And now we have a beautiful baby, and we live on the East Coast where our families live, in the outskirts of DC, living the uh, I wouldn't say the stereotypical suburban life, but close to it. Close to it.
Yeah.
We're kind of both cockamamie people, so we still have taken the path less traveled, I would say, to get to where we are.
Well, it's a great path. And it sounds like you came back motivated, at least, if not just with a head full of fun, happy memories.
Yeah, well, even when I came back and I knew that I wanted to write a book about this, I didn't think, oh, but I'm going to become a writer now. Like that's going to be my career.
Right.
It definitely was an evolution of other things not working out, but continuing to see progressive success in writing. And then I was like, well, I guess this is where this is what I'm doing now. And
The best
uh,
way,
yeah,
though, you know? You were
yeah,
basically, being a journalist, more or less, right?
yeah,
Collecting
immersive
stories.
journalism.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, that it really touching overall. Quite a
thank
beautiful
you.
trip. Um, what are you working on these days? What do you have coming up? Is it the your Icelandic travel memoir? Is that the main?
Well, yep, that one. So that is pretty much done. And I was thinking I would release it at the 10-year anniversary, that there's like a poetic,
Sure.
uh, coming full circle type of feel to that. But my next book that's coming out, so I have my memoir Survived By, and then my second poetry collection Mother, comma Verb was published in 2024. I wrote a children's book that was published a long time ago, but my second children's book is coming out, called Underwater Explorers and Rescuers. And it's a coloring and activity book that I was hired to creatively design and write. And so that'll be coming out sometime soon. I'm not exactly sure. I think sometime this summer. But I'm also writing a book of writing prompts. So for other writers, or any kind of creative, it's a one a day type of thing,
Yeah.
with anecdotes from my life, but also fun facts, nature, cultural, historical, inspirational quotes that then lead into a writing prompt. And that's called Write Some Cool Shit. And that's coming out in November.
Great name. Awesome.
Yeah. So those are, I always have something in the works. So those are forthcoming. And then of course Happy Iceland, like I said, will come out in June of next year.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to check it out. Um, Anne Marie, thank you so much for joining on the podcast and telling your wonderful story about your time in Iceland and collecting people's happiest memories and visiting those places. Such a cool way to travel. Actually, such an interesting trip.
Thank you for having me. It was great to share this story with you.
Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
A big thank you to Anne Marie for joining us on the podcast today and sharing her amazing experience in Iceland. Really, quite a unique way to approach traveling, and just an amazing story. You can find Anne Marie at her website, annemariewellswriter.com. And as always, if you've got a amazing story that you want to share, you can find me at oneofftravelstories.com.